On this Truthout Interviews, Bethania Palmus Markus is here to discuss the rise in migrant deaths in the American Southwest and how American companies are exploiting migrant labor to increase their bottom line. Her article on Truthout is entitled "Borderland Deaths of Migrants Quietly Reach Crisis Numbers." It's been widely read on Truthout and informs the basis of our discussion. Hi, Bethania. Welcome back to Truthout.
Hi.
So you went out with a group of volunteers to look for migrants in distress, and this was in the desert in pretty inhospitable conditions. I'm sure the heat was pretty oppressive. But really, this group of volunteers that goes out, oftentimes they don't find people in distress. They often find people that have died, and their remains, oftentimes just skeletal remains, are there. So tell us a little bit about this group.
Águilas del Desierto, it means eagles of the desert in English. And basically what they do is, about once a month or once every 2 months, as often as they can. They take about 7 or 8 people, and they comb through the desert in Pima County, Arizona usually, or just wherever they are told that there's somebody that had gone missing. And so they go out there and they've got full on gear, they've got compasses, and they've got protective wear, and they got radios, and they go out there and they look for people, and more often than not, unfortunately they do find migrants that have died because the conditions out there are just so deadly. It's the desert, and there's no water, so usually what they find are remains.
Yeah, and you said that sometimes, like within certain gullies, the rocks heat up so much. I mean, the ambient temperature increases more so because of the rocks that are heating up that particular geographical region. I'm not sure how hot it gets, but I'm sure it's certainly above 120 degrees.
Yeah, they said that the temperatures can hover around 120 degrees out there easily. And depending on where they are, the ground just basically radiates the heat back up.
Certainly people make it, and I don't know who the people are that don't make it, but I would imagine they're just not physically able to make that kind of that kind of trek, which they're walking through desert, and maybe they try to make most of the journey through night, but when day comes and if they're left behind from a group, the chances of them surviving are probably pretty minimal.
Yeah, the striking thing to me was how easy it is to get disoriented. I was looking around myself and I realized that there's not a lot of, although the landscape kind of looks the same everywhere you look, you can think to yourself, okay, I'll think of this mountain as being on my right side. And if it's on my right side, then I'm going the right way. And then you look around and you realize there's another mountain on your left side. It's definitely a deadly situation. There's no question about it. And being out there if they run out of water, that's it. Or if they have a problem with their feet and they get left behind, it's impossible to make it out.
And part of this is something that happened in the year of 1994 when border fences started going up in urban areas where generally people were crossing from the U.S.-Mexico border into the United States. There was also a pronounced militarization of the border in these urban areas, and it was the same year that NAFTA gets implemented, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, this has huge huge structural effects within south of the border. And what happens is you have an increased migration that gets shunted into the open desert. So just talk a little bit about the effect that NAFTA had on the economy south of the border and also the migration pattern.
It's interesting to note that NAFTA was signed the same year that, Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego was launched. Gatekeeper is the border fence and the so-called securitization of the border. So, NAFTA has basically created a situation where it's devastated a lot of people in Mexico because you have subsidized products like corn, pork, etc., that are being dumped into Mexico by U.S. Corporations. And so people in Mexico that used to make a living with these products now can't compete because they're not being subsidized. They can't compete with the prices. So it's caused a lot of, and that's just one small aspect of the situation. There's been a lot of problems with the way that land, small farmers and the traditional use of land in Mexico has changed drastically, and it's displaced a lot of people. This is all since NAFTA was implemented. That's just a very small aspect of it. But since NAFTA was signed into law, I mean, you would think that they knew this was going to happen because they started building the fences the same year they signed into law NAFTA. So it's basically created a situation where people who used to have a livelihood in Mexico can't survive there. And this goes for Latin America as well. But I know more about Mexico in this case. So they come, to cross the border to find work. But the situation is now that, there's these border fences and there's this massive military operation at the borders in the more populated areas where the crossing was more common. So now they're being funneled out to these very inhospitable deserts, like the one in Pima County, like Texas, and they're walking miles and miles and miles, in these conditions. I don't know, how many actually die, and I don't know if you can actually ever truly count it because it's hard to find a lot of these remains. And also, for example, at the Colibri Center, where they help people find their lost loved ones, they've got 1,500 cases of missing people that were last known or last seen crossing the border. So that's 1,500 people that, for all we know, could be out in the desert. So yeah, it's a deadly issue for sure.
Also in your article, you write about the way in which people that are in the detention centers that are waiting processing to be either deported or to hear their cases of amnesty, that they're being exploited by the companies that run these detention centers. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of labor exploitation that's going on?
The big companies that are in the so-called immigrant detention business are GEO Group and Corrections Corporation of America. And in 2013, I believe, between the two of them, they both made $416 million in profits. So, immigrant detention as a result of a congressionally mandated, it's called a bed mandate, where Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, they're required to detain every day 34,000 people. So you've had this explosion in immigrant detention, and the result is that these private companies have figured out that that's a way for them to profit, and they've profited very well.
And the kind of jobs that the people that are being detained, what are they doing?
They basically are like working to keep the prison or the jail or detention facility running. They're making food, they're cleaning, upkeep type of stuff.
So this obviously means that they don't have to hire anybody outside and pay them either minimum wage, or if there's a full-time job, benefits. So that obviously adds to the bottom line, or at least increases the profit margin.
Right, definitely.
It's a powerful piece. I encourage everyone to read it and also share it with your social networks. Bethania, I want to thank you for being on Truthout Interviews.
Thank you.
You can read her piece. It's called Borderland Deaths of Migrants Quietly Reach Crisis Numbers. And that's Truthout Interviews for another week. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.